How come you guys are all sitting back? Last May, I joined Western Caucus co-chairman Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming and 11 other members representing congressional districts across the country in launching the Endangered Species Act Working Group. The purpose of this group was to open an honest conversation about the Endangered Species Act. As most of you are aware, the ESA just celebrated its 40th anniversary, and the law was designed to preserve and protect endangered species. Now, there's still widespread support for that goal, but a lot has changed in the last 40 years. I think it's our responsibility as members of this Congress to look at this law and see if there are ways that we can improve it for the 21st century. The working group heard from all sides in perspective on what works and, frankly, what doesn't work in ESA and how we measure progress as to species being recovered. The working group received hundreds of comments. We held a forum last year where we had 17 witnesses representing a diverse group of stakeholders, including labor unions, local governments, environmental groups, private property owners. And then the Natural Resources Committee has held over 9 hearings in the last several years on the Endangered Species Act. So today we are releasing our report and recommendations of that work. I will say this, and this thing needs to be emphasized. There is strong support for conserving endangered species. We heard nobody testify that they thought any endangered species should go extinct. So we came up with 4 recommendations. The first should be self-evident. The first recommendation should be recovering species. Now, there are several ways to do that. Let me just highlight a couple. We should have some sort of way to identify a numerical goal of species recovery so we know, in fact, if it's been recovered. And we should have listing and delisting positions based on actual data. Those are just 2 of the sub-priority of the first recommendation. The second is to improve ESA litigation settlement reform. If there's one thing that we heard constantly throughout all the hearings, is that the ESA and its workings has become a litigant's dream. So we need a lot of transparency in that area, and frankly, we need some sort of way to discourage endless litigation. So that's the second area that we recommend. The third area, again, and this came out loud and clear in virtually all of our hearings, is that we have to empower states, tribes, local communities, and private property owners as part of this whole process. We found in many cases that there is more effort of recovering species on the state and local level than there is on the national level. And there should be a part of this also to examine the economic impact of whatever listing should be. And the final area for improvement is transparency, and frankly that transcends the first 3 areas. Because when you have these mega settlements and little transparency, what happens out of all of this is a whole lot of uncertainty out there with people that are affected. Now, these are the 4 recommendations. I invite you to go through the findings part of that, and if you'll notice, the findings part of that report is heavily footnoted. It's done that for a reason, because these are all recommendations of the findings, I should say, that we heard through the Natural Resources Committee and with the working group. Now, these recommendations are no way exhaustive. There will be other recommendations coming forward. And it was never certainly my intent, and I think the intent of the working group, to introduce a comprehensive, sweeping overhaul of the ESA. In fact, I think the American people are tired of comprehensive bills, if you want my honest opinion of that. However, we do think that there are some sensible, targeted ways that we can address improving the ESA, and that's the recommendations that we came out of this working group. So with that, let me turn it over to my co-chairman, somebody that worked very, very diligently on this, coming from a state that has been heavily impacted by the ESA, Congressman Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming. Cynthia?
Well, thank you, Doc. I want to compliment Doc Hastings, who brought his longstanding expertise on this issue and the efforts that have been made by previous Congresses to address some of the concerns that we hear from the people who have their boots on the ground and are trying to make the kinds of conservation and habitat improvements that will ensure the recovery of these species, only to find their efforts thwarted through the courts. So Doc has a vast expertise here, and I'm deeply grateful for his leadership on this issue. The Endangered Species Act passed in 1973. It was last updated in 1988. Its authorization has lapsed. Consequently, without Congress addressing some of the concerns that we hear, we are leaving it to the courts and the litigation that is brought to the courts to make improvements or updates in the law. Quite frankly, those so-called improvements or updates serve to benefit organizations and not species. They serve to benefit environmental groups that are trying to shape their litigation shops rather than recovering species on the ground. And what's not acknowledged is how significantly the American people have come to view since 1973 the importance of conserving our natural resources for the benefit of species that need them to survive and thrive, as well as for our own well-being. It's a moral obligation, and it's deeply embedded in the American people now. The Endangered Species Act itself and the people who are taking these litigation-driven models to protect their own self-interests are not acknowledging that the American people have incorporated into their very being the importance of conserving and recovering species. So consequently, we don't need heavy-handed litigation models in the 21st century. We need science-driven models. The science has improved so much. The understanding of the scale of the habitat that is necessary to conserve and preserve and protect species is so much better understood now than it was before. Now is the time to update the statutes to reflect our understanding of science and the fact that policymakers, the American people, working together can make this a better law that works better for species, for their recovery, for their sustainability, and also for communities and those people who are working, whether it's a Ducks Unlimited type of group that's working to help conserve habitat, or whether it's a state or tribe that's trying to balance their economic and jobs well-being with the importance of being sensitive to the species on this earth. I am grateful to Doc for bringing about this conversation. I think he has chosen a way to handle it that is very appropriate in that we've listened to the people, we've prepared draft recommendations, and that now going forward, members of Congress will have an opportunity through more bite-sized approaches to updating the Endangered Species Act to make a difference that will really work well for the American people in the 21st century. Now I'd like to introduce my colleague, James Lankford of Oklahoma. Oklahoma is one of those states that is dealing with the issues surrounding the lesser prairie chicken, as my state of Wyoming has, regarding the sage grouse. And we've learned a lot scientifically, and we want to proceed in a way that's rational for species and for people. I introduce James Lankford.
Thanks, Cynthia. I thank Cynthia and Doc for their leadership. This is a really important issue, not only just for species, but also for just economic development. In my state, as Cynthia mentioned as well, we're dealing with something that's actually in 5 states, and that is the lesser prairie chicken. That 10 years ago, most of folks would have never heard about. In fact, only just 2 years ago, Kansas stopped the hunting season for the lesser prairie chicken because it was such a common, populous bird in the area. It still had hunting permits to be able to use for it. But a report came out saying that they understand that there is a habitat degradation for the lesser prairie chicken in some of these western states. And so the initial recommendation came out, and let me just read a few of these things to you. To say to be able to handle the development of the habitat of the lesser prairie chicken, they're looking at this. The problems for the lesser prairie chicken are livestock grazing, conversion of native prairie grass for development of crop productions. That is the fragmentation of the habitat by adding roads, utility corridors, fences, towers, turbines, or any energy development. The alteration of fire regimes, which if you look in the report meant historically there would have been wildfires through the area, and so they want to go back to having uncontrolled wildfires in the area. And the planting of trees. Those are the problems they see for the lesser prairie chicken. Farming, energy production, adding roads, and then the further put to that, they said any features associated with human development. The push is simple in western Oklahoma and in the western states, that they would say people should not populate western Oklahoma. The lesser prairie chicken should. To add insult to injury, in the same report, they said the lesser prairie chicken needs to go back to prior European settlement status. And we continue to ask the question, as Americans, we do want to honor every species that are around it, whether it be plant, animal, bird, whatever it may be. But we're also going to have human development. There are private property rights. We do need to have energy. We do need to be able to farm and to graze. So these things happen. We can do both. But to have a pushback and say that the main problem for the lesser prairie chicken is that there's livestock and that there's farming and that there's energy production begs the question that apparently there's a belief you cannot do both. We believe you can. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me introduce Randy Nagelbauer to be able to come up, one of our colleagues from Texas.
Good morning. Again, I want to also thank Doc and Cynthia for the leadership that they brought to this working group and for inviting me to participate in it. As mentioned, I'm from Texas, the 19th Congressional District of Texas, and I'm proud of this report. I think this working group did some good work product. I think it begins to kind of shape what are the issues here that need to be addressed, gives a little bit of an education of where we've been, where we are today, and I think will provide an excellent blueprint for some positive solutions in the future. I want to talk about a number this morning, the number 2. You see, 2% is the recovery rate over the last 40 years under the Endangered Species Act. Now imagine if you went to the doctor and the doctor says, you know, you need surgery. And you say, well, doctor, what kind of, results do you have? And he said, 2% of my surgeries are successful. Now, I would imagine that that would be a doctor that you would not want to perform your surgery. Or imagine the young man that comes home from school and tells his mom and dad proudly, hey, I got a 2% on my test today. I got 2 out of the 100 questions correct. And so what we know is that we've spent tremendous resources, put a lot of stress on private property owners, enriched a lot of lawyers, and over the years, and spent all this effort with a very low recovery rate. And that would tell you, hey, the way we've been doing it isn't working. And so I think one of the things that's important about this work group and work paper is it begins to, give some solutions and some ideas. One of the ideas that I really like is the fact that the current system is very top-down. It's basically you've got the Fish and Wildlife and courts and all of these groups telling everybody else what to do. A novel idea is to go back to the area where the species live and start at the local and the state and working with the property owners, people that know the environment, know the issues, and begin to have them develop plans. Why is that important? Because they know more about it than the people at the top. And one of the things that I like about that is the fact that, we begin to look at the alternatives, and we need to do cost-benefit analysis and look at each alternative, weigh those, and making sure that we're headed in the right direction. And I think it was also alluded to, is we need to understand what the goal is. What is a realistic goal? In other words, what is going to define recovery here? Will we have, tenfold of what used to be here? Maybe not, but if we double that, maybe that's recovery of that species. And so it's common sense, and this is a great work paper, and I'm glad and proud to be a part of it. And I'd like to now introduce my good friend and colleague, Mr. Bishop from Utah.
Thank you. The Endangered Species Act demands that the federal government work with state, local governments, and tribes to the maximum extent possible. What this report clearly shows is that is not happening. that a lot of great ideas that are coming from state and local governments and tribes are being dismissed by the federal government. And that mere action opens up the opportunity for more litigation. What we have to realize is that all brilliance does not emanate from Washington or a courtroom. We also have to realize that there is a role for government as long as government is effective, efficient, and uses common sense. The Endangered Species Act, as it has been applied in recent years, does none of those three things. It is not efficient, it is not effective, and it doesn't use common sense. This document, if you will read through it, is a great wake-up call to say we need to do something different than we have been doing in the past. And now I'm happy to introduce another good Westerner, even though it's Pennsylvania, G.T. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. And technically I do represent Western Pennsylvania. Central Pennsylvania, parts of Eastern Pennsylvania. It's such a big district.
Puxatawny Phil see a shadow the other day?
Yeah, let's not bring that up. I was there with him. That was not a good morning. 6 more weeks of winter. Yeah. Yeah. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming out to this press conference this morning. You know, this is. I'm very proud to be one of 13 members that have been brought together by our chairman, Chairman Hastings, and the co-chair of this Endangered Species Act task group, Mrs. Lummis from Wyoming. You know, a lot of times government and legislation just goes on autopilot, and when that happens, it doesn't go well because it requires oversight. And I think after 40 years, it's time for some good oversight on ESEA. And the fact is, this is an appropriate time for us to pause and to really look at what has happened to the Endangered Species Act. That was a good piece of legislation was passed. It was supposed to be science-based. It was supposed to be collaboration with private property owners and states and tribes and interested parties. And it was supposed to be science-driven, full of good scientists. And unfortunately, as we paused, and I really appreciate these past 7 months, because in a thorough way I've been able to really look and examine exactly what ESA was supposed to be and where it's gone, to give us some direction, this blueprint, these recommendations to guide us in the future. And today, unfortunately, they're mostly attorneys making decisions regarding these species, which we all seek to protect, and not near enough scientists, and certainly not enough science, and too many decisions made in backroom settlements that are completely opaque, where all key interested parties and key stakeholders are not allowed to be at the table. And so I'm very pleased with the process. I'm proud to be a part of that. I'm very thankful for our leadership here and my colleagues that helped develop this. And I think it does provide us kind of a recommendations to guide us into the future. It does it in a way that that is principle based, looking whether it's reform to litigation, transparency, the collaboration aspect of it. And so although I'm not here to talk about lesser prairie chickens, I'm from Pennsylvania. This is by the nature of this working group. If you look where we're from, this is the Endangered Species Act is a national issue. The legislation was passed to address national concerns and provide some problem-solving approaches. And so I'm just very proud to be a part of this group, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on legislation going forward to implement the recommendations that you have before you. Thank you. And it's my pleasure to introduce the gentleman from Michigan, Bill Huizenga.
I'm Bill Huizenga from the 2nd District of Michigan, and the Great Lakes State isn't maybe necessarily something you think of as you go into this, but we've had our own share of dealing with these issues and wrestling with this, and because it is one of the most unique climates, one of the most unique elements of this world. When we see that much fresh water, we've got microclimates, we've got all these other things, and we've got some things that we need to protect. A unique environmental situation out in the Great Lakes. And whether it's the piping plover, the bird that has been along the shores of Lake Michigan, or the thistle pitcher, which is a plant that is very unique to the Great Lakes, we've got to go in and make sure that we are protecting and providing those habitats. But at the same time, I think the thing that has struck me the most as we've gone through this report is trying to figure out what the finish line is. Are we even close to the finish line? How are we making sure that we've got some standards, figuring out that we have actually accomplished what the goal is to make sure that we are not having a carrier pigeon type situation again ever in this country. And I don't think any of us want to have that. But again, I think the most important thing is we're dealing with our communities, dealing with our states, as well as our national government, is helping to figure out what that finish line is to make sure that we are being successful as we are trying to put forward some very laudable goals. And the last thing I want to do is, being a former staffer, I know you're only as good as the people you surround yourself with, and you're only as good as the people that are going to work on these things with us. So I just want to say thank you to the staff for the many hours and time and effort that they put in together organizing those hearings and organizing this report. So thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to bring it down south, the Panhandle area of Florida, my good friend Steve Sutherland.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. That's Steve Sutherland from Northwest Florida. So that gets me hopefully a little honorable mention in the clan there. But thank you very much for assembling here today to hear about this important work. I want to thank Doc and Cynthia for their leadership on something that is very important. This working group is the starting point for an open and honest dialogue about something that we've needed to talk about for a long time. One thing I want to say as a kind of a newer guy here in Washington, D.C., Washington, so many of the things that have been done here and that are done here focus on the what we do and the how we do it. And this also applies to you as individuals. When you look in a mirror and you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, you're off base. If you're writing today in this room and you're reporting and you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, the chances are you're being off purpose. And I would say that here in Washington, D.C., we do a lot of things that are off purpose. And we allow important pieces of legislation that affect millions upon millions of people because all we do, oftentimes, is talk about what we do and how we do it, but we get away from the most important question. Why do we do what we do? This working group has been an attempt to get to that question. Why is the Endangered Species Act important? Why is it in existence? And how have we gotten away from its original intent and original purpose? You know, Doc mentioned the 4 things that we need to talk about: listing, delisting. He talked about litigation reform. He talked about transparency. Those are all symptoms of a bigger problem because those are all in existence because we got away from the why. We've got to get back to the why we do what we do. I know in my neck of the woods, Apalachicola National Forest, which is a treasure in my district, we have these regulations and how these regulations are the whys or the hows and this regulation have spun out of control to where now you see overprotection of certain species to the great detriment to the people that live in my district. I hope that these ideas and all the hearings and the data that we've collected will really help us to get back to doing what this legislation was intended to do from the very beginning. Let's get back to why we do what we do. And with that, I'm going to turn to, let's see, who else do we have? Oh, Doug. I didn't see you on the list here. My friend Representative Collins from Georgia. Georgia, come on in.
Thank you. Well, I guess from all the westerns, I'm northeast Georgia. I'm Doug Collins from the 9th District, so I'm going to take up for the east. And it shows this is a national issue as we go forward. And again, for Doc and Cynthia, thank y'all for doing this and including me. As a freshman, you come to Washington and you get all the big stuff. I remember within the first 60 days, we had everything from the world was collapsing to budget votes to debt ceilings and everything else. And those things always will take care of themselves. You'll report about them, people will talk about them. But everyday life is affected in individual pieces of legislation that many times are missed. Many times are overlooked. And my perspective is what I promised the people of the 9th District of Georgia is we're going to talk about things that may not grab the headlines, that may not be the star-studded events, but they matter because they affect jobs, they affect people, and they infect lives, and especially those in the 9th District of Georgia, where we have the Georgia mountains, we have from the lakes, and it's just a part of Georgia that conservation has always been a part. The red clay hills that you used to read about many years ago have now, through work of our environmental groups and through the work of our farmers, have now become green hills. When we take care of the environment, we take care of the people there, then productivity comes. Two things that have been mentioned today that are really interesting is one is specific for us. You may say, well, why is Northeast Georgia worried about this? We have a thing called the Indiana bat. If anybody here would show me a picture of the Indiana bat, I will take that picture to Northeast Georgia, and that'll be the first sighting in over 55 years. However, we had a transmitter beacon go off in southern Tennessee, and nobody can prove that the bat was there, but they decided to take all of North Georgia and say, from now on, you have to mitigate for the Indiana bat. This is adding cost after cost to projects, and simple projects that, in fact, we've not even seen the bat. Show me the bat. It's just not there. One of the things, though, that drives this is litigation, and I'm pleased that Chairman Hastings included in the report actually tackle litigation. And I am a sponsor, the lead sponsor of Sue and Settle, which is the legislation that takes and provides transparency. It would provide ESA litigation reform along with other areas where you cannot just simply sue the agencies and go into a back room with a judge and get a consent decree away from those who are actually affected. We're going to bring transparency. We're going to encourage public participation. We're wanting everybody to take a role in this. So my goal in this and being a part of this working group with all these great folks and being a freshman here, is you look at it, I guess the best thing I can say from my perspective as a lawyer is maybe we can make the litigation process of ESA the endangered species, that the attorneys and the litigants become partners in protecting our wildlife instead of protecting a courtroom and protecting their settlements. They need to be on the endangered species list, and we need to protect those that need to be there. Thank you.
Let me take questions, but before I take questions, I want to make predictions. Seahawks by 35. Any questions? Yes, sir.
One of the things that was mentioned in the report is that there's a lack of clarity on how to implement the Endangered Species Act with other laws like CIFTA, and that I guess affects your state in Washington in terms of farmland that gets used. Is there anything that, when we ask the agencies about it, their answer is that they have trouble meeting their statutory obligations or even figuring out how to? Is there things that you guys can do to change the statutes that would help with that?
Well, that may be part, overall, but there's no question. In fact, that's what you just described is not something that's exclusive with ESA. Those conflicts go on within our whole system, but we do have to figure out a way in order to do that. If the endangered species, and I think this probably the best way to answer that is if we go back and look at legislation to recover species, we'll probably in large ways answer that question and how that affects others. But we'll work on that as we go forward. But that probably is the best way if you have a goal of how you're going to recover a species. Yes, ma'am.
Can we expect bills or legislation this Congress to be put forth, introduced, passed, or is there existing legislation or bills that are on the table that you guys will be taking significant action to move forward?
We anticipate that out of this there will probably be some targeted pieces of legislation within the next 30 or 45 days. And obviously if we give you everything today, you'll have nothing to report in 30 days. So we'll hold that for 30 days, but in that time period. Yes, ma'am.
To follow up on that, have you prioritized which recommendations you're going to move forward?
No, that hasn't been. But the priority will be though, and I think the priority will be constantly throughout this process of legislation to recover species. After all, Endangered Species Act, recover species. That certainly makes sense, and I think that'll be the priority all the way through. Okay, thank you all very much.